Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Not Your Mama's Midlife, where we believe that midlife is not a crisis, it's actually an awakening. Hi, I'm Tasha Davis, nurse practitioner and owner of Downtown Hydration and Wellness in Aiken, South Carolina. But for today and for future episodes, I will be your host and your tour guide through all things midlife. Okay, I'm taking a deep breath for a reason. We are going to go on a little bit of a journey in today's episode. It may turn into a little bit of a series. We'll see. I do want to go ahead and give a disclaimer and a trigger warning. If you are someone who has dealt with and is processing and trying to heal from childhood dysfunction and or trauma, this episode may be a trigger for you. So I do want to put that out there because we're going to get into the thick of it, right? Because it's so important to say the thing. That's what we're here to do. So this is going to be a challenge for me, and I'm hoping to get through it. Like I said, I think that this could be potentially a series. We'll see where it takes us. So we have talked about in previous episodes early on about the unmasking, right, of that we experience during perimenopause, the unwillingness to go with the flow and just keep the peace and, just try to, that good girl conditioning just continues to, be present in our lives. But then when we get to perimenopause and we're just done with it, right? We're done pretending that things were okay that weren't. We're done, faking it. And so at midlife, a lot of things start coming to the surface. Maybe things that we had pushed away, whether it be because we didn't want to deal with it, whether it's because you felt unsupported, whether you were even questioning yourself if things really happened the way that you remember. Because again, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have that negative self-talk or, blame ourselves in some way. But I do want to talk about coming to the realization of just maybe the toxic or childhood dysfunction and trauma that I think a lot of people our age experienced. So let's just take it back. I think that, first of all, that realization actually doesn't start in perimenopause. For a lot of us, it actually starts when we start having our own children. And when we have our own children, we start seeing the world in a very different way. We start, viewing relationships and viewing events in our lives very differently once we have children of our own. And I think a lot of us, when we have our children, we are all about them, right? We're trying to protect them from all the things. We are parenting them a lot of times the way that we wish that we had been parented ourselves. Whether it's safety, physical safety, whether it's emotional safety, whether it's just a deep connection. We have, a lot of times just look to do those things with our own children because we feel that maybe we missed out on it as we were children from our families. And I will, put this out there. You don't know what you don't know. And we've said that plenty of times before. But there's just something about that innate, feeling when we have our kids of just like overwhelming need to protect and want to do all the things. Sometimes to, the other way, because, again, with my ADHD, sometimes I can swing it to both extremes. Not saying either one is better or worse, but it's just a reality. So I think sometimes I believe we call it overcompensating. And I will tell you, I am very much guilty of that, of overcompensating with my own children, just because I once I had them, it really put my own childhood into perspective. I do want to say also that it's really important that we understand that there are, multiple things can be true at the same time. And it doesn't make one more true or less true, but it's all about perspective. And so I say that because I hear from patients and from friends, and we have conversations about this topic. And maybe you have felt and experienced what I'm talking about with once you started having children. And maybe you were brave even before perimenopause and wanted to kind of have those discussions with your family members about your childhood experience. And maybe it was shut down. Maybe you were met with, oh, that never happened. Maybe you were met with, well, that's not true. I don't remember that. And maybe you were met with, it wasn't that big of a deal, or you were just a dramatic child. Or, I had no idea, maybe I'm just the worst parent in the world, whatever the case may be. If you were met with that, first of all, I'm sorry. Your experience is your experience, and no one has a right to tell you your experience, right? We come into situations and even as adults, within our, friend groups, within the workplace, and we can all sit and hear the same information, but we're all going to process it like a little differently. For example, I had a situation where I was going over lab work and lab results with a patient, and he had brought his wife. This was I guess it was a couple of weeks ago now. And so, I take my time. I kind of like to explain, do a lot of education, with my patients during that consultation about their lab results. And, you could tell based on the feedback that I was getting, that, he wasn't hearing what I was saying. And, and it doesn't, for whatever reason, it could be, maybe he didn't understand it. Maybe he just looked at it from a different lens, a different perspective. Doesn't mean one's right or wrong, but still the fact remains that we all kind of can hear the same information, and then the takeaway can be a little different. And that's really true when it comes to, when you try to confront and try to just heal childhood dysfunction and trauma. And again, if you've had that conversation and you've tried and you've had multiple attempts and it just kind of seems to fall flat a little bit, I'm sorry. And, I want to just say kudos for you for being brave enough to do it, because there's a lot of people that, were kind of still in that good girl conditioning where you're just quiet. You're quiet. You keep your mouth closed and you don't say the thing because that's what keeps the peace. But it keeps everyone's peace but yours, right? Because it does come at a cost. And typically it's at the person who's just being made to be quiet. And so what can happen is when you've had that trauma and dysfunction in your childhood, that's pretty much your baseline, right? That's what you have to go off of. And sometimes it's not until we have our own children that, the blinders kind of come off and like we start seeing things for how they actually are. And then we have to learn to parent ourselves while we're parenting our children. We have to parent ourselves. And that can be very hard, very frustrating. It can be, and it shows up in different ways. It could be you're raising your kids and you look back and you hear yourself saying phrases from your childhood, and then you get angry with yourself and you're like, oh my God, I sound like, fill in the blank. And it could be situations where, something happens with your child and your immediate response is, empathy and love and a teachable moment. Whereas maybe in your childhood, you think back and like, gosh, I would have been, punished for that, or I would have been, unsupported in that situation. And so these are constant triggers. So for someone who has lived through childhood dysfunction and trauma, there are a lot of triggers for us when we're raising our children. And we always don't make the right choice in that moment. Sometimes we react emotionally, and we react from our wounded self, right? And not our healed self, because we haven't acknowledged the problem. So we definitely hadn't healed from it, right? So that's what we have to do first. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to name it, and we have to say it. And that's really hard. It's really hard. It's not easy. There could be, repercussions, and that we may be afraid of, and that's okay too. You're not on a timeline, right? Healing is not, just like this. We heal, and then we kind of settle in until something else comes, and that's okay. We have to learn to give ourselves grace when we are, healing from that. And, for me, it's just one of those things where it's really important for me to have my children become adults and, not have to heal from, trauma and dysfunction that I inflicted on them. And, not to say that, there won't be something already, because, I know that I have not been a perfect parent. I am one of those that has had to learn how to reparent myself in ways, to validate my own feelings, to make sure that, I am taken care of too, and I'm not just the caretaker of everyone else. A lot of things that, a lot of topics that come up in conversation with friends who are in our age range, in this perimenopausal range, is, the parentified child. And so the parentified child kind of looks like the child who had to take care of, do adult responsibilities, right? You had to do like the cooking, and you were responsible for feeding the family. You were responsible for cleaning the whole house and keeping a house clean. You were responsible for take care of maybe younger siblings. You are responsible for the emotions of your parents. And so a lot of times what happens is when you become, if you're in that situation where you are a parentified child, you don't think about you, right? Because it had never been about you. It was not about your feelings. It was not about your needs, both physically and emotionally. It was not, you felt not considered. And everything else and everyone else, you were there to take care of them, whether it's tasks or relationships or whatever the case may be. And that's not okay. And so we're going to say that that's not okay. That's not the responsibility any child should hold. It should not be on the shoulders of a child. Those shoulders aren't built for that level of responsibility. And so what can happen is we don't talk about these things, right? We don't say those things, but we start realizing and feeling these things once we have kids. Because, and that's when we can get in trouble with doing the opposite, right? Swinging the other way, where we overcompensate. So maybe you were you were a parentified child. You had to be responsible of the cleaning and the cooking and, a lot of the household duties. And so then what can happen is, so then your kids, you're like, You never ask them to clean. You never give them responsibilities of helping with dinner or doing chores because we are so worried that we're going to instill that same level of responsibility that was on our shoulders in our childhood. You got to protect those babies. So we kind of go the opposite way. And so, I have found that I am guilty of that personally. So I know that that can happen. And again, with my ADHD, of course it happened. So definitely went the other way. But it's all part of the healing process. And when you know better, you do better, right? And so, I personally have been working really hard to kind of transition a little bit away from that extreme to get more of the middle road. Because now that my children are older, I do see the value in learning those skills. It just should not be the responsibility. And so there's a difference in like the responsibility versus learning, right? Learning how to cook and learning how to clean versus you're responsible for the dinner for the family. You're responsible for cleaning everyone's bathroom and cleaning the kitchen and doing the floors and the bath, the whole shebang. And there's a difference. And so I have learned that through my journey of just kind of finding that middle ground. One other thing, that can happen is, when we are in that moment and we are, parenting our children and we find ourselves, triggering our own selves, right? I can trigger myself in a second. So we trigger our own selves, then that kind of, we really don't want to deal with it, right? Because again, we are good girl conditioned. But then we get to perimenopause and then all bets are off, right? All bets are off. And so it's really a mixture of a lot of things, of a perfect storm of why that happens. Again, we have talked about the hormonal changes, 100%. But then, and we've also talked about, we're just tired. We are tired from doing literally all of the things. So when you are tired, you kind of don't feel like you want to fake it anymore. But then the other part to that is we get to a period of where we just need to be empowered, right? We need to feel like things matter and we matter and self-care matters. And part of a lot of our self-care is going to be visiting these stressors, these triggers, these wounds, and starting that healing process. And that looks different for everybody. Again, there's not a timeline and it's not like, okay, well, I want to start healing my childhood wounds, so I need to do XYZ. There's not a manual. Oh, there might be a manual on it. I don't know. But it's such a personalized thing. And so if you are anywhere on that journey, I just want to congratulate you. I want to tell you that I'm proud of you because it is not easy. It is absolutely not easy to come to that realization, number one, because it's sad. And then you start, give me a second. Sorry. You start grieving that childhood that you wish you could have had, right? And then you start grieving relationships that you wish could be different. And that's not to say that it won't be different, but there has to be some acknowledgement, right? There has to be some validity in what you experienced. Even if other people do not share your view, even if other people say that they just kind of dismiss it, that doesn't invalidate your feelings. And that doesn't invalidate the hurt that you have, because maybe they're responding from a wounded place too. A lot of times childhood dysfunction and childhood triggers and trauma is generational. And not everyone wants to say the thing. not everyone gets out of that good girl conditioning. So it may be too triggering for them to acknowledge it. So I think that there's room for grace there, for everybody. But I just want you to know that no one gets to invalidate you. No one gets to dismiss and say that you're wrong, right? Because we know what we feel. We absolutely know what we feel. And, there are, one thing that I'm so proud of is I have been very intentional with my children that when I have messed up, and trust me, I have, I go to them from a place of humility and I apologize. I remember when they were little and I would apologize. I remember when they were, in their, adolescence, I was apologizing for, flying off the handle, again, my hormones raging, maybe I was emotionally triggered, whatever the case may be. But after some time, if I felt that was, not the appropriate response and reaction for the situation with my children, I would go and I would apologize. And I hope and pray that they remember that, right? I hope and I pray that when they get older and they start looking back and revisiting their childhood, they might say, whew, my mom would just like show out. Or my mom, she did not take any of it. But I hope they also remember, but she also apologized when those things happened. And she was also got better, because that's how you know you're really sorry, is changed behavior. And I think a lot of us struggle with that, because especially if you don't see the change behavior, and when you feel like your feelings and your experience is being dismissed, that doesn't really leave a lot of room for change behavior, right? Because in order to change, you have to admit and acknowledge that there is something to change. And not everyone's willing to do it, but hear me, it doesn't matter, okay? Because that's on them. We're worried about you. We're focused on you and your healing. And so you are validated, and you are not, you're not going unheard. And I hope that you've had the experience that I have with my children, and apologizing when those triggers kind of peek their ugly head up. And then you grow from it, because that is what a powerful thing to teach our children, that we can make mistakes and that we can apologize, and then we're validating their feelings too. I mean, think about that. Think about validating their feelings. And, I've had situations with my kids, and I'm going to tell you, I mean, when they try to roll it back, I'm sitting there going, that was literally not what happened. And that's what I'm thinking. But it doesn't matter, because that was their perspective. So, and in those moments, I'm like, I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry you feel that X, Y, and Z. That was not my intention. I kind of see it this way, but it really doesn't matter how I see it, because at the end of the day, your feelings matter, and I am so sorry. And I think that's so powerful. And it's so important. It's so important because, we want to try to avoid those things in our children, but we're not perfect, right? We're human. We're not perfect. I have definitely overreacted. I mean, maybe once or more. I'm just saying, I will give them one. But I do like to think that for the most part, I'm very intentional about going back and apologizing. And I do hope that they remember that part. So if that's something that you haven't experienced in your relationship with your children, I invite you to try it. What's the worst that could happen? You validate someone's feelings because you are lacking that for yourself. So that is going to be all for today. Let me know if you want to kind of keep it going. There are a lot of things kind of going on in this head here of ideas of talking about, a healing from that childhood dysfunction and trauma. So let me know if you guys want to hear more, if you guys want to talk about a little bit more. Thank you for allowing me to be transparent and have a bit of a moment a second ago. But it's hard, right? It's hard, but it's necessary, right? It's so necessary that we say the thing and that we just let people know they're not alone in that. There's some buzz going on, about estrangement, families being estranged, and different reasons for that. And there's 1.5 million viewpoints on it, and there's it could be a good thing, it could be not a good thing. That is going to very much be such a personal decision. But I just want you guys, if you are, kind of feeling that almost bubbling up, right? This bubbling up of whether it's anger or just, I say, sometimes I just fight rage. And so whatever the case may be, I would like you to, if you are someone who struggles with the anger part of your childhood, and maybe it's not your whole childhood, maybe it's just specific events. If you are someone who does struggle with anger surrounding that, I would like to invite you to, maybe the better word for that is grief, right? There's a eloquent quote on that is escaping me right now. I'll try to find it, maybe drop it in the comments. But, I was angry all the time until I realized it wasn't anger, it was actually grief. And so maybe it's grief that you're feeling bubbling up. Maybe it's grief for a childhood that you wish you would have had. Maybe it's grief for that little girl. Maybe you're doing something that you're just your 5, 6, 10-year-old self just would not believe that you're doing. And so you're kind of grieving that little girl. Maybe it's grief because you feel like you've lost the relationship with your loved ones because maybe you tried to address this and it didn't go well. But anyway, I have learned that for the most part, anger for me is really just grief, and that's okay. So we grieve, and then we heal, and then we move forward, and that's the plan. So, and the fun part about it is our children get to see it. I love that my kids have gotten to watch me evolve and become better. And I love that. I made mistakes. I didn't always do the right things, say the right things, and respond in the right ways. But I'm really proud of who I am today. I really am. And I am proud of the fact that my children have gotten to witness my own personal transformation, my own personal unmasking, because that lets them know that what they have to look forward to themselves. So anyway, that is all for today. Thank you again. If you want to hear more about this topic and for us to kind of dive a little deeper into it, we can do that. Like, share, and subscribe to our Spotify and YouTube channels so you will get notified when new episodes are released. And I think that is it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next time. Bye.